Hello, I am Jan Oberg, the director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research that you see up here at transnational.live, committed to the UN Charter norm of making peace by peaceful means, which everybody is ignoring these years. I promised today to speak a little bit about, within half an hour, the post-corona, if there is such a thing, the post-corona society, what we're supposed to learn from the COVID-19 corona, and what society might look like, what we will have to do after, when it has died down, so to speak. So this is done on the precondition of the assumption that at some point it will more or less break down. I'm not so sure that this is not going to be a somewhat permanent thing, but let's start out and try to understand the phenomenon. First of all, this is what in social science is sometimes called a black swan. That is a small, unexpected, in this case not visible, phenomenon that turns out to have enormous consequences. There are many such cases in human history where a small occurrence, a single person doing something, a moment of unpredictable, unexpected thing happening that has huge implications for the present and the future. And this is definitely one of the things you could put, the label you could put on the corona crisis, that we're talking about a black swan. And that means also we're in uncharted territory, as was very clearly evident from the way the governments were unprepared, and I'll come back to that in point two, were unprepared for such an event, although it is not the fact that it was not at all predicted. There were lots of people that said pandemics, of course, are going to happen again, as they have before. So we are in a situation where it's very difficult to handle this and the post-corona unless we are willing to experiment. And that's a very important point. There's no way we can just continue as normal, back to normal when it's over. Point two. I belong to the very few people who say that this is not predominantly a health issue. Its main effect should be that it is seen as a security political issue. That means we should be appalled, we should be in uproar, we should knock over governments for having spent billions of taxpayers' money on fighting wars or planning for wars or meeting invented, imagined enemies who never come. But when the corona hit, they had no preparation for what was needed in that situation. No face masks, no equipment for the people working in the health sector, etc. This is probably the largest scandal in modern history, but it's not treated as that. And there's not a single government who has apologized for its outrageous ignorance of human security, of securing the best possible welfare under such a circumstance for its own citizens. I made another video on this that you can see on TFF's Vimeo channel. And I think it's very important we keep in mind that we will learn nothing from the corona unless we completely change security political thinking. There's no way we can keep on pouring money into arms and arms and arms against enemies we invent to legitimate this, and then keep on totally ignoring the welfare, the health, the security, the human security of our citizens. But I tell you, I'm afraid that even the military will exploit very much and say, oh, we can do everything that is needed, transport capacity and all that, when the next pandemic hits. It is no to militarism from now on. And it's thanks to militarism that there was no protection of human beings all over the world. No single government had the right protection and had thought about civilian threats and civilian protection and survivability of society. And that is, to me, perhaps the single most important conclusion. But I have a few more points, of course, to make. So we've got to live with insecurity in a kind of way we haven't done before, but we will also have to perhaps disarm at least 50% of everything in the world and devote it to being able to meet these type of threats, the civilian unexpected threats. And be much more creative in discussing what could threaten society. Point 3. This has already caused a huge economic crisis, with a few exceptions, the main one being China, which is already, have put the corona behind it and is rushing ahead economically. I'll come back to that issue. We will have to learn from the corona in the economic sphere that we cannot do with the type of capitalism we've done with before. If there's any hope for the future, it will be green economies, red economies, blue economies, and whatever. It will be state management, it will be cooperatives, it will be market economy, it will be capitalism, it will be socialism. It will be multi-economies in one country at a time. Not at a time, but in all countries we'll have multi-economies. The idea that everything can be solved by neoliberal capitalism has always been intellectually for dwarfs. And that's what we've done the last 30, 40 years in the Western world. And of course, it's coming back now with huge implications. When some main systems break down, there is nothing else you can stand on. We've got to increase the self-reliance of each society at the same time as we rush ahead with globalization. Nationalism means war. And nationalism means economic de-development. So the long story short is we will have to live with a completely new, much broader, much more diverse economic thinking in the future to also increase the resistance of economic production in crisis times. 4, democracy has taken another huge hit with this because we have seen how easily and how fast even so-called democracies can change into very authoritarian decision-making. Of course, in the name of we are protecting the people and we must take good care of our country and blah, blah, blah. The fact has been that Prime Minister after Prime Minister has basically done what he or she pleased to do. In many cases, just arguing this is an emergency and we can do whatever we want. Now, I can only predict that at some point the peoples around the world will say, enough is enough. If you keep on doing lockdowns, telling us by weekdays in advance that these shops can open and these shops can close and family companies are ruined, lives are ruined, economies are ruined because of your decision-making. A decision-making that became necessary because you had no real defense and security politics. Then obviously we are in a situation in which there will be uproar. There will be mass demonstrations. There will be people who defy these things. And if enough people take to the streets and simply say, I'm going to open my shop, I'm going to go to the restaurants, I'm going to go to the library, I'm going to go to the art museum, I'm going to drive my car, I'm going to visit my friends. No society can prevent that if there are enough people doing it. I am not saying or urging people to do it. I am saying that this is what is likely to happen this year, 2021, because you cannot you cannot force people to sit indoors over this summer and believe that they do it for the common good. The idea is not lockdown. That's a bizarre thing, or closing borders. The idea is strong protection of every single human being. And that's what we were not able to do because I can even take this little place where I'm sitting, Lund, Sweden. There were no face masks in February and March when I asked in all the pharmacies in this town, do you have face masks? No, we have no face masks. When will you have it? We don't know. This is security politics. It's failed. It's been immoral. It should be condemned, and people should rise against it because it's their tax money that have been spent to something for something else but the face masks that the people needed. And of course, other types of protection. I'm giving this as an example. So democracy will definitely be something we have to reinvent. We have to democratize democracy to be able to stand up next time it happens in a completely different way, in a much more cooperative way with citizens in everybody's interest, if you will, for the common good. Governments who say, hey, we take over everything here, we don't have to have even parliamentary debates about this or laws, we are just announcing that from tomorrow, everything is closing down, is unheard of in democracies, no matter what. Well, I would say perhaps with the exception of real war. So those who call themselves democracies have something to think about. Really strongly. How was it possible? Was the fine lacquer on top of the word democracy and the system of democracy so thin that you could turn into authoritarian, slightly dictatorial governance? Did we not have better preparations than this panic decisions? And what can be done in the future after the corona to democratize the way in which we meet the next pandemic? 5, trust. This crisis has meant a huge blow to human trust. Trust in the governments, trust among people, trust among governments. For instance, the relationship now between Sweden and Denmark is worse than it's been for a long time because of this closing and opening and making communication difficult between two otherwise brotherly countries. We have a trust problem because how do you survive when you know that you can't trust your governments? You can't trust that it actually is for the common good. And the world's so-called largest democracy where, believe it or not, journalists call Capitol Hill the temple of democracy. We've had riots. We've had corruption. We've had a totally bizarre way of meeting this corona in what I'm thinking of course, is President Trump's way of more or less ignoring the whole thing. And the hundreds of thousands of people who've died unnecessarily around the world. That has not built trust, and no society can exist without trust among human beings. Citizens believing each other, trusting each other, knowing that you're not being lied to and things like that. And so one of the consequences of corona is we will have to work hard on rebuilding trust. And that is, since it has to do with human psychology in a different way than, let's say, economics, this will take a long time. And it's a hugely important dimension of the corona. We do not trust each other the way we did before. And the way we did it before was on its way down. 6, the corona has revealed in 2 levels an incredible amount of individualism or egoism. The Danish government, for instance, which I happen to follow quite closely because I'm a Danish citizen, but I've lived in Sweden for 50 years, just announced in the beginning of March that it was closing the border. It's like, rolling down the curtains and say the world out there does not exist. The only thing we care about is to help ourselves. It's an absolutely wrong way of dealing with it. It's not a matter of closing borders, because this problem did not come only across borders and could not be stopped by closing borders. But the panic discussion led to, or lack of discussion, but the panic reaction led to closing of borders. This is a huge failure for the supranational project called the European Union. I mean, it's hard for me even to believe, but it's true. It was China and Russia that came in to help Italy in the corona situation. The brothers and sisters in Europe, the European identity and all this nonsense, to be diplomatic, did not even encompass the members of the European Union itself. So if you think of the future of the European Union, I think it's very bleak. We've had the European Union releasing the war in Bosnia by recognizing Slovenia and Croatia out of Yugoslavia. You've had the refugee crisis in 2015 that it could not handle. You've had it unable to be an alternative for 4 years to Trump's leadership, to be the alternative Western leader. And now you have a corona that has basically split the whole union. It's been a bizarre mishandling of the corona situation. The first thing the prime ministers of the European Union should have done would be to call each other and say, hey friends, what are we going to do about this? Let's stand together. Let's come up with a solid solution. Let's not close borders, but cooperate over borders. And the other level, this was a national egoism. The other level, I would say, is citizens' individualism. I was appalled by the fact that it took so long time for people in the West to understand that face masks is not about protecting me from others. They are about me protecting them from me. I learned that because I've lived in predominantly Japan for quite a long time. It's the way you think of the collectivity. It's the way you see yourself as part of a family. So people said, I don't care. They kept on, if they could, go to bars and have parties and do this and that, totally irresponsible, without the protection, various types of protection, such as distancing or face masks or whatever you can do to take care of others. And it reveals a very sad trend, or characteristics probably rather, of the Western world. It does not see, societies in the West do not see themselves as families, as me having a responsibility to help my neighbor. It falls apart in individualism and in complaining individualistically and saying, I'm not going to wear a face mask because it's not necessary and I don't care. We cannot develop our societies based on individualism and carelessness about the person next to you. The corona should teach us to be much more thinking in terms of the common good, as a family, as somebody who cares, each one of us. How can we help society through crisis and be less self-oriented in a situation like this one? And definitely, if one important thing you can do is to wear a face mask, that should be a very small thing to do for the common good. Point 7. I think we will see a huge change thanks to the corona too, or a change that will be emphasized by the West falling or declining further, while China and other countries who have come out well of the corona crisis will benefit. And so the difference between countries, East and West, the Occident and the Orient, will be even more clearly unmarked. At the moment, China is rushing ahead economically, and China has also found out, if they didn't know for long, that it is not meaningful with the present American leadership, Trump and Biden, to create a win-win situation for the two civilizations. I think the Chinese are now with a new 5-year plan probably saying, we've got to be able to do most of what we need to do in the future with our own resources and with our friends and with the countries in the Belt and Road Initiative, the so-called New Silk Road. And that the fact that the decline of the West was already very clear and significant in many ways and many indicators before the corona, that will now be more clear, and the decline will be faster because also the economic recovery will take much longer time in the Western world, whereas China, if you will, killed the virus very quickly, you may say clearly with brutal methods too, but they did what in my view was correct from the point of view of the collective good of 1.4 billion people, 400 million people. Now that will have long-term consequences for world order change, for the further decline of the West, also because the West has handled it so badly. As I mentioned, the European Union before and the United States, fooling around basically. Whereas the Chinese and others have handled this in a resolute way, and that's an important point, it's much more important on what governments do. Citizens see themselves as one big family, helping each other, taking each other into consideration, and seeing the necessity of working for everybody's welfare and not being egoistically saying, I don't care. So we're going to see a different world, a world that is changing faster economically, in terms of power. And I want to emphasize, I do not believe, and there's no indication of it, that the Chinese want to start a new empire the way the West does. They don't think that way, but that belongs to another discussion. China's strength is basically defensive, and it serves China and the partners. It is not a matter of taking over or fighting or winning over or starting a Chinese empire. And they have no idea about mission. They don't want us, the rest of the world, to become Buddhists or Confucianists or communists or anything like that. Whereas the disease, a very, very basic disease of the West, is we want to intervene in other countries to make them like us. So this terrible part of Christianity, that they should be like us. They're either with us or against us, and things like that. So this the speed with which the world will change and with which the West will become, in the best of cases, if we survive the decline of the US empire, a partner among equals. Otherwise it'll become a periphery, and we'll see the benefits of the win-win thinking. Then I'm afraid that the West is destined for very troublesome and tragic future. I hope not, but that's a possibility. If nobody wants to listen in the West and the US keeps on insisting on leading the world, that will be the end of the US empire. And we can only hope in that case that that will go peacefully and not with a nuclear war, a whimper instead of a bang. 8, and finally, everybody talks about going back to normal. There is no going back to normal possible. The normal we had before the corona hit the world was already extremely troublesome, with militarism, climate change, undermining of democracy, economic crisis in many parts of the world, increasing income gaps, etc. I mean, all the things that we've talked about for 60 years, and I'm old enough to remember it, nobody has really done something about it in the Western world. We had the discussion about the environment and Rachel Carson in the late 50s, a path-breaking book about the environment as something we should care for. We've had the Club of Rome reports from the early 70s. We've had tons of opportunity to change the world, change the economy, live in harmony and partnership with nature. We haven't done it. We've had tons of good possibilities for building down militarism and armament and disarm, particularly when the first Cold War between the West and the East in Europe ended in 89-90, and the Soviet Union fell apart, and the Warsaw Pact fell apart, and what did NATO do? Everything it should not have done. So this is the kind of, it was bad enough before the corona came. And believing that that bad enough situation is something we should return to and just get the wheels running again and all this, the answer is no. It is physically and also it is morally impossible. There's only one thing, and that is to be humble, to experiment, to go ahead and say, we've got to do things differently. I call that the new necessary normal, NNN, the new necessary normal. And that is recognizing the crisis of the West in our part of the world, learning the things I've tried to say, plus others of course, from the corona, such as changing security politics, disarming at least 50% of everything called the military, and devoting resources instead to the common good and to alleviating people from poverty, lifting up people like China has done so brilliantly and uniquely in human history. And you can go on like that. It will be a time of humility and experimentation and win-win. Any type of ongoing Western confrontation with everybody else is outdated and bizarre and self-defeating. And that's why I would like to express the hope that Corona will be a wake-up call for all of us, and that we can use it for something constructively to make the world a better place. It is possible, but not if we think of returning to what was normal before the Corona hit us. So I say thank you very much for your attention and for being interested in how we can create the new necessary normal that will be for the common good of everybody on our little planet. Thank you so much.